Yeah.
Hello, we can hear you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. P. Kumar Mangalam. I teach Spanish at the Department of Foreign Languages Studies, Central University of Karnataka. I, on behalf of Prasaranga, the publication division of Central University of Karnataka, welcome you all to this 3-day international webinar on translation. I feel privileged to welcome the dignitaries of our university. I welcome Professor H.M. Maheswaraya, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Central University of Karnataka. I welcome Professor G.R. Naik, Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, Central University of Karnataka. I welcome Professor Mustaq Ahmed I. Patel, Honorable Registrar, Central University of Karnataka. I feel honored to welcome the keynote speaker of our webinar, Professor Indrani Mukherjee, who teaches at Center of Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and Latin American Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. I would be giving a formal welcome and formal invitation, formal invite to her to address to share her keynote address with us in a short while. Uh, so I take this opportunity to welcome to Professor Vikram Bisaji, Coordinator Prasaranga, and the team of the organizing committee at Prasaranga, Dr. Kiran, Dr. Abeni, Ms. Deepthi. I welcome colleagues from other departments, Central University of Karnataka. I welcome teaching fraternity who have joined us from all over India and also abroad. I welcome students. I welcome researchers who have joined us with a lot of interest. And above all, I would like to welcome on behalf of our organizing committee all the translation lovers and enthusiasts, and I am happy to count among myself among them. So I welcome you all. And before I proceed with requesting our honorable dignitaries to share their views with us, I would like to briefly discuss the theme of this webinar and why we have decided to hold this webinar on translation. And after that, I would request my dignitaries to share their views. And then afterwards, I would welcome our keynote speaker and we will have our Q&A session. So this webinar, as you all know, that the topic of this webinar is Thinking Translation, Exploring Dialogues Across Disciplines. And when you hear the word translation, you see so many things come to your mind, and that is precisely, our motive to basically provoke a lot of discussions, a lot of inquiries, a lot of questions on the topic. And when we think of translation, generally assumed notion about translation is that it's just a linguistic exercise limited to word transference, translation of source language text into target language text. But it's much more than that. And I would limit my observation, my exploration of elaboration of the topic to just 3 points. First point is that translation, the generally assumed linguistics exercise, is also important, particularly in science and social science streams. But even there, it's not that limited in scope. Even there, it is not just word to word translation. And as our speaker of the second session today, this evening, Professor Sundar Sarukai would elaborate, even in the domain of sciences and social sciences, one has to grapple with a lot of history, culture, while translating concepts and terms as such. So that is one important aspect or topic or form of translation we are looking at. Another important point which we had in mind while discussing our intention or our vision behind holding this webinar is that translation is always cultural. No matter what, if you undertake translation, it always comprises, it always has elements of culture, history, and one has to always negotiate, navigate these appreciate these larger socio-cultural references. That's why translation is always multi-referential, and a translation which is able to gain appreciation of these references behind the apparent simplicity of the target of the source language text is the one which actually is a live translation which gives translation its afterlife in the Benjaminian terms. So that is another important aspect of translation we are going to look at. Another very important crucial aspect of translation which we are dealing with over these 3 days is that translation is foundational. Translation is basically what makes our identities and cultures as such. So translation as maker of our identities and cultures. And there are ample examples all over the world. So translation here is inherently political. It can either be depending on who is enacting, who is in charge. It could either be imposing of one meanings, and it could also be subversive of those very meanings, which are, coming from colonial relations of power and so many other forms of relations of power. So it could also be subversive, and there are a lot of examples from India and from everywhere else. So about India, if you just look at, Dalit Dalit poets and Adivasi poets like Susila Asur, Nirmala Putul, who have consistently engaged in debunking, uh, in uh, in challenging definitions given to these communities by others. And here the others are dominant powers who use translation to basically define these communities. And these communities fight back with their own versions of translation. So translation here is a very, very powerful domain. Latin America also is a very rich example, and our keynote speaker would, of course, enlighten us more on this. So, with this, I would invite our dignitaries to share their views with us. I would first of all invite our uh, uh, our registrar, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor H.M. Maheswaraya. I would request you, sir, to kindly share your views on our endeavor. Over to you, sir.
Okay. So, Madam Indrani Mukherjee, the keynote speaker of this international webinar, and also my Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor G.R. Naik, my Registrar, Professor Mustaq Ahmad Patel, the coordinator of this webinar program, my friend and head of the Department of Kannada, Professor Vikram Visaji, and my colleagues from the Department of the Journalism, Mass Communication Journalism, and also my publication unit, Prasaranga. So it is I deem it very privilege to inaugurate this a beautiful international seminar. As you know that the Central University of the Karnataka is striving very hard to do a lot of good academic work in this university. So my interest is to have a department of Indian languages. At present we have a Department of English, Department of Kannada, and Department of Hindi. I would like to have the Department of Indian Institute, the Indian languages, like Central Institute of Indian Languages. We should have an institute in Indian languages in this university. Already I sent a proposal to University Grants Commission. So because we would like to have the department like Malayalam. So within that faculty from Malayalam, Telugu, Tamil, Bengali, Odia, and other languages. So we should have a very strong foundation of the languages in my university. That's my concern, because basically I am a professor of Kannada and linguist. That's why my basic concern is to have a very strong department here. I requested the Kannada department and also Hindi department colleagues to start a diploma in translation from this academic year. They're already trying for that. As you know that the translation is very important. When the Sam Pitroda suggested to the Honorable Prime Minister of India, then the Prime Minister is uh, no, not Rajiv Gandhi, Manmohan Singh. He suggested to have a very strong department of the translation mission. That is why the National Translation Mission is established in Central Institute of Indian Languages. I am collaborating with the National Translation Mission since long. I know that what is the development which is going on. Particularly among the 22 the scheduled languages we should have an translation. That is the idea, so that the Indian knowledge system should translate from one language to another language. We are very sorry that except for English and other some foreign languages, we doesn't have this kind of an interaction between the languages among the scheduled languages. That's the fate of India. As you know that there are thousands of languages. According to Grierson in 1900, India is having 1630 languages, but now it is reduced. We may have nearly 800 to 900 languages at present, according to the Linguistic Survey of India made by Professor Ganesh Devi. I also participate in that and also published a beautiful book on Kannada, the languages of Karnataka, like that. So these are the things, very, very important things. We have to see that this is a very important idea. So that is today I am happy my colleagues are having this webinar on the translation across the disciplines, very important disciplines. That's very important. So that is, as you know that as a linguist, I know that there are a number of problems which are encountered in translations. One is the formation of the translation equivalence. We call it as TUK. Translation equivalence is a very great problem, particularly in the concept of aesthetic translation, scientific translations, and also the philosophical translation, legal translation, and scientific translation. There are difficulties we are facing among the disciplines, as you know that. So that's why how to encounter these facts is very important. Now, even now, it is a challenge. How to encounter this and how to form the translation equivalence in that language. That's one aspect. Another one is untranslatability. So we cannot have translation, so that is for some particular terminology. Then what we have to encounter? The concept of untranslatability is also one of the very important phenomenon. There we can see how to do that. When we are talking about the translation across the discipline, this untranslatability as well as the translation equivalence also playing very dynamic role. So that's why I'm happy that so that is so many books are available in the field of translation. But however, the expert translation, there are methods, there are so many kinds of translations. So that is, as you know that, so that is how to encounter these problems. That is one of the very important phenomenon of this webinar. I am happy that the Vanamala Vishwanathan, she has translated the classical Kannada literature into English, like H.S. Shivprakash, and many scholars from Colombia and also Bhutan, and many countries are participating. I am happy to note here more than 1,000 participants has registered for this webinar. So when I was delivering a valedictory address at the Rani Channamma University, so they had done one international the seminar they have conducted. They have done. When a small state university is doing this, why not the central university has to do this? That's why on the same day I requested my colleagues, and the same day they have decided to have this kind of one of the very important the webinar. So that is, I'm very happy to inaugurate here. I am also equally interested to listen when I am possible. I can listen these lectures from great scholars across the world. So I'm very happy here that I'm congratulating my youngsters, my colleagues, heads of the Department of Kannada, and also the director of the publishing house, Prasaranga of the Central University of Karnataka, and also the journalism. So that's my faculties here, like Kumara Mangalam, Deepthi, and also Kiran and Abeni, also there here. They are youngsters. I am very proud. Recently, I recruited 80 members. I am very proud to say that. So across the country, have recruited my faculty members. That's very important. Recently, I had been to Stanford University. There I saw more than 40% of the faculty members from not only from the country America, they are from other countries. So that is my intention to have the faculty members across the country, across the world. If there is a provision to appoint the foreigners, I would have appointed foreigners also to this university. A higher seat of learning should have a best teachers. So across the country, across the world we should have, then only we can develop a very beautiful the concept of education, higher education. Even though we are there away, far away, this university doesn't have any air connectivity. Now recently there is air connectivity here, and also we are there in a very backward area. But however, in the infrastructure as such, we have 1,30,000 square meter of building constructions, many hostels, a beautiful guest house, and also the multi-purpose hall, a beautiful lake also we have constructed. Among the infrastructure is constructed, those university appointed, they started in 2010. So our university stands one of the best university among them. This is all the effort by my faculty members, my administrators, and all my engineers, all they have done it. Okay, I'm very happy to be a part of this program. I am very with eager, very with, I am very happy to inaugurate this program. So let us listen to other scholars. Thank you for giving me this opportunity because I am heading this beautiful university. That's the reason I am very happy today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind words, and we are very privileged to have you as a very inspiring leader. I would now request our Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor G.R. Naik, to kindly share his views, his few words with us.
Good morning. He is a linguistics and Kannada professor, and as he rightly said, man behind all the activities which are going on in university and particularly related to the languages. Our registrar, Professor Mushtaq Ahmad, places in India and abroad who have come here to take part in this webinar. I am very glad that very large number of participants are engaging themselves today to attend this webinar and take part and listen to the eminent persons who are there in this series. In fact, the corona pandemic has become some sort of a gift to our university because, as rightly told by our vice chancellor, it is a place where which is away from the main transport system. So, organizing such a webinar with distinguished people from the various places would have been a big task for the department if it had been conducted with the offline way. But today, with the digital way, we are here, and most of you are very much expert in this translation field. The seminar will be a very big feast to the listeners. As you know now, the new education policy has recently been unveiled and which stresses very much on the languages. In fact, the policy goes to the extent that the education should be extended even at graduate and postgraduate level in the regional languages. So there is a great need of people who are expert in the translation in the various subjects, and our department, which is established here, the Department of Languages, Kannada, Linguistics, Hindi, now foreign languages, English, and many more may come as a proposal is already submitted for the Indian languages to the UGC. So this particular seminar will give a boost, and our faculty and the persons who are already engaged in this particular activity will get lot of information from this webinar. So once again, I congratulate the faculty of mass communication and journalism and also foreign languages, Professor Vikram Visaji, and our authorities for organizing such a great event. Thank you for giving me an opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words. Now I would request Honorable Registrar, Central Institute of Karnataka, Professor Mustaq Ahmad Patel, to kindly share his words with us. Over to you, sir.
Professor H.M. Maheshwariya, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Central University of Karnataka and man behind all the academic developments, infrastructural development of the university, Professor G.R. Naik, Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor and Shadow of Vice Chancellor, who is continuously striving for academic growth of the university, Madam Indrani Mukherjee, then we have got Maria who will be joining us, Shashi Kumar in the evening, probably Professor Vikram Visaji, head of the Prasaringa division of the university, my colleagues Dr. Kumar Mangalam, Dr. Longshi Beni, Dr. Gajinur, Mrs. Deepthi. I'm happy to note that the Prasaringa division is taking up a webinar international in nature regarding thinking translation, exploring dialogue across discipline. Yes, the Central University of Karnataka has got a good number of language departments starting from Kannada, English, Hindi, and we have got foreign languages, and we have got classical Kannada. We are discussing about endangered languages. In foreign languages, we have got French, Japanese, Arabic. So probably in days to come, our young faculty will take up the local literature available in Indian languages to the world by translating the material. It is a good thing to note that the Indian literature, Indian epics were translated even in languages like Persian and Arabic, and the people enjoy thoroughly when reading those materials across the globe. So we have got recently Prime Minister of India was mentioning that we have got a good number of literature available in Indian languages. India being old culture and heritage, we need to propagate our culture and heritage to across the globe. That is why the role of translation becomes very much important. As Honorable Vice Chancellor has told, the translation does not mean translation of the verbal sentences into a different language. It requires emotional and contextual presentation also. It has the political background also when you translate. Do translation get us award? That is also a kind of thinking. Translators also do get awards, like American Literary Translation Association also gives award for good quality translation. Sahitya Academy has also given award. Recent, I was browsing on the website and I found that Shashi Tharoor and Anand Kishore have been given awards in 2019. I'm forgetting the name of the writer, Malayali writer who translated the content from Malayalam to English or vice versa and got a national award. And as far as me is concerned, I am part of a university which is meant for Indian languages, that is Maulana Azad National Urdu University. There I found that academic material is less available in Urdu as compared to the English material. That means there is a provision and there is a scope and there is a necessity also to translate the academic content into Indian languages. I have done some of the translation from Urdu to English, English to Urdu again, Kannada to Urdu, and vice versa, and similarly Hindi to Urdu and vice versa. While doing so, I have encountered many difficulties. Maybe I found that glossary is not up to the mark, which can be utilized for academic purposes. So that means a base has to be established before you launch your helipad. So there is a requirement to work on into that area, and probably in the days to come, in the 3 days, you will be deliberating upon that. And there is one more area which is emerging. Recently, I procured a product in the market during the month of Holy Ramzan. We use dates. So that dates, it was some name was there for that dates, and along with that dates was written in English. And the commercial market or the company has translated using Google, and they said so and so kimia dates, kimia tarikhe. Date means the fruit, also date means the events or the date which we use. So Google translation is having some problems, like outstanding personality means the person who is standing outside, it translates into Urdu, whereas those are the verbal translations which may not suit to our academic purposes. So machine translation also need to be given a thought of when you discuss various issues. I hope I congratulate first of all the Prasaranga division and my colleagues from languages department that they have taken a very pertinent issue for deliberation, and they have invited experts across the globe to discuss this. As Vice Chancellor and Pro Vice Chancellor put before you, we were at disadvantage when we look at the location of the university, but we are at more advantage when we look at the pandemic situation and use of technology within the university. Not only that this technology is being used for academic purposes, we are all like conduct of webinars and seminars and conferences, we are also holding online classes. We are also conducting examinations, and we are also improving our day-to-day functioning by including Samarth project within the administrative region. These are the things which I wanted to share. I wish all the best for the organizers and thank them for inviting me for the inaugural session of this program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your remarks and for your constant support in our endeavors. Now, without standing in between the participants and our keynote speaker, I would just move on with formally introducing the keynote speaker of our webinar, Professor Indrani Mukherjee. Professor Indrani Mukherjee teaches at the Center of Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and Latin American Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She is the second generation Hispanist and from India who wrote the first ever PhD on Latin American literature from any Spanish department in India. Her publication include comparative literature, cultural studies, and pedagogy of literature from perspectives of gender. Uh, She graduated with a master's degree from Indiana State University in the US and a PhD from JNU. Her last published books were Transcultural Negotiations of Gender, Studies in Belonging, which was published by Springer in 2016, and Gendered Ways of Transnational Unbelonging from a Comparative Literature Perspective, which was published by Cambridge Scholars Publication in the year 2019. This is particularly a special moment for me because I have been Indrani's student and she has inculcated among all. I'm a small member of the universe which she has created over last more than 20 years, the universe of scholars, and she has imparted, she has trained this universe with with certain values, and it's a particularly special and emotional moment for me as I welcome Professor Indrani to give her keynote address to us. Now it's over to you, Indrani. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mangalam, for this kind words, and thank you all. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I must apologize in advance for any possible loud noise. I've got two dogs and unpredictable, and I hope that they won't suddenly decide to bark and make noise. So you will bear with me. Thank you, Professor H.M. Maheshwariya, Professor G.R. Nayak, Professor Mushtaq Ahmed Patel, the organizing committee of Vikram Visaji and your team for today's invitation. I am overwhelmed and equally humbled by the presence of such eminent speakers in this webinar with whom I share this podium today. And I would like to congratulate the Central University of Karnataka fantastic idea to hold this webinar on track. Just as new courses in foreign languages, namely Spanish, Japanese, Arabic, and German, are about to be launched in the coming months. The teaching and learning of any foreign languages always involves translation of languages, literatures, and cultures, either overtly or otherwise, consciously or otherwise. Teaching and learning of a foreign language is a performative in marginal dispositions of orally, in a sense, of the above. Taking cognizance of differing world visions, Walter Mignolo's submission on vincularidad entails a relationship between all living things with the land and the cosmos. He draws this concept from the Andean indigenous vision of the integral nature of all life forms and their material surroundings. So the human and the non-human are at the same levels of potential agency. The post-human body is thus an organically connected body of all human, non-human, including animals, plants, and any material thing. It is also important in this context to look at Edward Glissant's relation language, which is made of rocks and words. Verb, noun, subject, object are not fixed in their places. Quote unquote, I quote, in relation, every subject is an object and every object is a subject, unquote. He also takes cognizance of the Deleuzian rhizome as, I quote again, an enmeshed root system, a network spreading either in the ground or in the air with no predatory rootstock taking over permanently. The notion of the rhizome maintains, therefore, the idea of rootedness but challenges that of a totalitarian root, unquote. What would the implications be for translation? Another very important thinker who talks about the post-human body is Hamid Tabashi, who draws our attention to the fact that some bodies are expendable, such as the elderly bodies are expendable amid the pandemic. This has a dark historical precedent in the disposable Jewish bodies of Nazi Germany, the euthanasia, abortion, organ transplant, physician-assisted suicide, and plastic surgery. Tabashi looks at how such breakages are normalized in Western thinking. In his submissions, he highlights the kidnappings of children from Latin America, Africa, and Asia for organ transplants onto bodies of North American bankers, corporators, politicians, and security advisors. My argument is, can we draw some parallels of vincularidad, relationality, and the expendable post-human body that I have referred to above with translation from the margins? To argue my point, I will only give some examples of translation as theory and praxis in the Latin American, from the Latin American margins. The first example is the following poem that can be situated in this praxis of social movement seeking identitarian spaces and a literature retrieving its unwritten past. Thus, in the 6th International Book Fair of Quito, the presence of Afro-Ecuadorian women took off by the launching of an anthology of poetry written by them. It was marked by an event which was unique and a real pathbreaker. I quote, now I'm quoting in my translated version for brevity. For this event, the women poets dwelt upon parts of their creations which recollect the voice of their ancestors from across the ocean, the past slaves and today's fighters of freedom, unquote. The agency of the Afro-Ecuadorian women track an unwritten past of their peoples. Group writing a single poem is an unprecedented example of group action. Writing and activism merge to enable and empower a new group subject. So I'll just read the poem, and I'm going to read my translated version. It's called Force of Liberty. They arise and run from the rear, Negroes and Negresses, falling and rising, brought over to sow sugarcane. Moans are heard, ancient lament, it is walking through the same fate, sensation of being alive, light on the path. Shared space, nascent harmony, hands that rush, complacent gaze, I embrace my sisters, attractive tenderness, I feel their energy, an ardent warmth, finding you and yours, open smiles, living emotions of content girls, force of liberty, world in motion, in search of a dream that many crave. And this is authored by Creación Colectiva. That is a creative collection. Okay, so end of quote. The group of women who compose this as a cluster of voices coincides with testimonial literature which supposedly gives voice to the voiceless cluster of them or translates for them. But unlike the testimonial, where only one narrator recounts the histories of our people, here they are a group of them. These are real people, their own forefathers, and reek of a conscience-raising process seeking decolonization. They redeem their dead from having been the subject or the object of anyone else's salvation and propose instead to save them from their indignity of such objectification. Uh, Siento su energía, sorry, attractive tenderness, I feel their energy and ardent warmth. The first person singular conjugation of the verbs are actually a group subject. That is a tough challenge for translators. While in contemporary mainstream translation, subjectivity and agency become highly problematic issues as they find themselves among a constituted and disciplined subjectivity. The trend as in the above example is clearly the opposite, that is of a group subject. How do we reconcile to such a subject as translators? They were transcribing their past. What can be said about our understanding of translation or translator? How much control does this plural subject have over the message and over themselves as the messenger? Group poetry is a unique kind of transmission because one has to listen to the other poets in the group and then has to respond. How did I translate? To show solidarity, to do a correct translation, or simply to do a keynote speech? If anybody's guess. What is the intention of the translator's receptor? Glissant's understanding of relationality is seen playing out here as subject and object become interchangeable locations. The second example that I would like to talk about is of Subcomandante Marcos of the Zapatista movement. For him, translation is not merely interlinguistic, but also intercosmological. Thus, in his book entitled The Speed of Dreams, he talks about indigenous language in very interesting way. For the Mayan Indians, words are guards of their memories, so they are materially produced to help them from losing their memories to lesser gods. The words are also objects which help them see their future, and hence they are very precious and sacred, like a locker. If their words how can they share them with the world? They claim to have hidden them in the hills and in the deep sea. It will be impossible even to access them, and this concept can be understood through Edward Glissant's proposal of right to opacity or the Bashir's refusal to become a doorkeeper of his culture or of Mignolo's stand with epistemic disobedience. How can I translate, but they won't even allow me to enter their lockers? Do I have to break in, destroy the hills and the seas that protect these words? But Subcomandante Marcos translates for them, with them, from behind the covered face, to become them. He translates, deals, negotiates, and converses between the indigenous peoples and the government. Such conversations through translations have allowed that they be heard and that they make deals with government. They even have representations in the Mexican parliament as they win elections. The third example that I will dwell upon is the cognitive incompatibility of indigenous languages and Spanish. Walter Mignolo reads this incompatibility as the fracture in the language produced by the intervention of other grammars, quote unquote other grammars, that of an Amerindian language and of the cosmology that grammar mirrors. I quote, in the fracture produced by translation from Tojolabal to Spanish to English, the cosmologies of grammar highlight the dimensions of colonial difference. Carlos Lenkesdorf describes Tojolabal as an intersubjective language, by which he means that unlike Spanish or English, it lacks direct and indirect objects. In languages like Spanish, the grammar places some portions of the world, including persons outside a speaker's realm of, realm of interactions. Amerindian languages such as Tujulabal are based on a cosmology in which persons, living systems and nature are not objects but subjects. This interaction between grammar and cosmology has been noticed in other Amerindian cosmologies. As long as grammar, cosmology, and knowledge remain interrelated, translation or transculturation cannot be controlled by one type of correlation between language, worldviews, knowledge, and wisdom. End of quotation. Elsewhere, Mignolo gives the example of Nahuatl language, where young Nahuatl-speaking peoples have translated into purposefully ungrammatical Spanish texts of oral narratives through transcription and transliteration. The next example of translation as a daily phenomena in Latin America is that of Gloria Anzaldúa, who conceives of an in-between space from wet pink rather than a hybrid space to talk about. Spanish, English, and Nahuatl play out here but challenge the grammars of words and bodies equally. The pain of being in Nepantla, Anzaldúa argues, is the pain that results from the violent encounter and clash of culturas que traicionan, that is, cultures that betray, cultures that take away our ability to act, cultures that block, immobilize, or cut off entire continents from their source of life. End of quote. However, she also produces a way of thinking that renders Nepantla as a shamanic space of healing, a strategy of crossing that offers the decentered border subject an alternative way to approach colonial ideology. Translation is dehegemonized and appropriate to counter cultures which betray. In order to look at how bodies translate, I would like to give two examples. One is Frida Kahlo's paintings of her body, which is basically white, but she deprivileges it by highlighting her Mexican identity apparel, headdresses, and accessories, her relationality or vincularidad with plants and animals, her broken body after her accident, highlighting her pain, her birthing of a dead child, showing spilling menstrual blood, and most significantly, her flaunting of an indigenous identity as she paints herself suckling the breast of an indigenous woman. The body becomes an irritant to colonial visions of the world, which is obsessed with the purity of blood and with a missionary's zeal for salvation. Frida doesn't surrender to either and challenges that with the bold gaze and the posturing of her body. She performs decoloniality by translating her body pain into her defiance of a rational order of gender and by identifying with the translator Malinche in her paintings. The second example that I would like to dwell upon is the body of the slave, who performs dance-like moves to rhythmic drum beats, that is the practice of a deadly martial art, the capoeira. These bodies of African slaves become the spaces over which contesting colonial powers meet and then write their violent histories of dominance and power. These bodies, however, react violently through their disguised or secret martial moves, thus creating a counter-narrative with which to write back. Translation in this example is simply that of converting physical abuse and whiplashes into a secret code of resistance. Taking stock of all the above, I would like to bring the following modules as we have seen thus far from where we look at thinking and performing translation. Number one, Afro-Ecuadorian women group writing poetry. Number two, Comandante Marcos and his team producing and securitizing the Mayan word locked up in the mountains and the sea. Number three, Nahuatl people translating indigenous texts in purposefully ungrammatical Spanish. Number four, Chicanos in conceiving the Nepantla and in-between space from where to think a shamanic space of healing and also a strategy of crossing that offers the decentered body subject. Number five, the Malinche, Fidacalio, and the Capoeira use their bodies to translate not faithfully, but like traitors, to challenge coloniality of power, to refuse to submit or to be controlled. In all of the above-mentioned cases of marginality, one will find that the translator is located in a relationality, a vincularity with non-human and the material world. Translating from the margins, I propose, is a re-territorializing sojourn outside of striated spaces, fixities, and normativity. The Afro-Ecuadorian group subject, the Mayan, who materially produces the sacred word, the Nahuatl translators flaunting the incompatibility of grammatical Spanish with the Nahuatl cosmovision, the Chicano in Nepantla and in an in-between space, and the Capoeira combating physical abuse are all quote unquote my suggestion is that they are all translating assemblage with non-human and with the cosmic forces surrounding them all. They are the expendable spaces occupied by expendable bodies. They are the post-human bodies who are yet to become citizens, fighting for their legitimacy, their human rights, and their visibility. They translate with their languages and their bodies, which they weaponize as they carry many bodies in themselves as autochthonous colonized subjects who are trapped in coloniality of power. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Professor Indrani, for this detailed and thought-provoking session with us. Uh, so, Professor Indrani spoke about how in the geocultural space, which we refer to as Latin America, which includes whole of South America, the current day Mexico, and uh, some countries in uh, Caribbean islands where Latin origin languages, languages which have come from Latin, are spoken, Spanish, Portuguese. So this whole geocultural space has been a very interesting site of cultural encounters and has also suffered, uh, you know, versions of translations which are originating, which are getting sanctioned, which are getting imposed from the powers that be. And accordingly, simultaneously, it has also been a site of reverse translations, mistranslations, untranslatables, all the variants of decolonial, potentially decolonial vices which challenge hegemonies of power. So Latin America is this site for last so many years of currents and countercurrents, hegemonic and anti-hegemonic versions of translations. And we sincerely thank Indrani for sharing some very pertinent examples to show how marginalized voices are registering their presence, their protest through translation. And translation here is is a very organic activity. It is not coming from a text which is outside. It is coming from your body. It is coming from your engaged presence. So this has been a very remarkable feature of translation in Latin America. So with this, I would move on, and I would request my participants to kindly share their questions in the chat box, and we would take these questions one by one, and we would forward these questions to Professor Indrani. So Indrani, I benefit from this opportunity, and I ask you a question, and I would hope that many more participants would share their questions. So my question would be uh, related to the the phenomenon of mistranslation, which is deliberately done. If you look at the context of what you have discussed in the case of Subcomandante Marcos, their translation strategies. I remember in one of our discussions, you had shared a text where they are deliberately mistranslating Spanish. So they are deliberately playing around with the Spanish grammar to basically present to make present their alternative worldview. So could you please throw some light on that? Thank you.
Okay, okay. Yes, so that is exactly what they do. They purposefully break the grammar and they don't care. And I think I've written about this in some publication of mine, I don't remember now. But anyway, the point is also that it was also very important that they do this because there were the fact is that these translators were actually trained by people, people who were interested in their cultures and in their histories, and they helped them in deciphering the Mayan scriptures, in the Mayan hieroglyphics, and the other forms of representation in other parts, like in the Incas, the Tipus, and all. So now it is that it was now that the first or second generation of Mayan Indians are educated, they have been to European universities and come back to their land. So they are doing it because they want to make a distinction between themselves as translators and the translation of non-Mayan or the non-indigenous peoples who, just because they have deciphered, they think that they know everything. So it is really an ongoing struggle because even today all the hieroglyphics have not been deciphered, and even if they have, we wouldn't know because they are also not sharing. And in this context, I would also like to make a point that I had gone to Shantiniketan for one of my research, and I met some poets and writers who are writing in Santhali, and they refused to translate. They refused to translate, saying that that we will not translate. And even if, because I explained to them this situation in Mexico and Central America, and they said, no, we are not interested in translating, even because if we translate in wrong English, it will make us fit into our stereotypes that we don't know English. So we are not interested. So this is also another very interesting point of view of how. So it is. So again, actually, and it highlights the point of that translation. You cannot be objective. This whole myth of objectivity. It is very colonial. I think it's a very colonial hang-up. I think you cannot have a perfect translation, and I think it's comforting to learn all that because as we teach Latin America in Spanish, we always suffer this thing about how do we read this text, because are we going to just reproduce objectively the translation or the interpretation of quote unquote authorities? Can't we also think in different ways? So I think that is a very positive way of looking at this phenomenon. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Indra.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your uh, answer. So the next question uh, is basically uh, seeking your opinion, or what do you think about the categories called political translation, and is there anything called apolitical translation? How would you react to these two terms?
Uh, of course, I think, as I've said in my paper, all of us who are doing foreign language teaching and foreign language learning, we are always translating. And obviously, I can't think of how any translation can be apolitical. And as far as if you say that in science it is possible, it is not possible. Because if you look at, people like Karan Barad, who is a physicist, or if you look at Donna Harvey, who has talked about cyborgs, So science also has its borders with non-science, with humanities, with art, and even so. The fact that Yehudi Menuhin, a musician, was friend with Albert Einstein, and they had some communication. So I think it is those myths of disciplines. Actually disciplines were put in place in the sometime during 18th or 19th centuries. And so I think it's very problematic, because I don't think science can be also objective, and it can't be objective. And I don't think that there can be any translation that can be objective. And that is, give an example. I mean, Don Quixote, for example, has been translated across so many centuries, the same novel. And in fact, my research students don't want to take up Don Quixote for doing any research. They're mad. It's not a subject we have already said. But the thing is that, but still there are newer and newer things being said. I mean, how can you have objective translation or objective interpretation or objective anything? I think that is something like science orientalism. There is no apolitical translation. That is why we have this whole hijacking, this whole problem with post-truth, because again that post-truth is again a kind of a gaming, which those who don't want to acknowledge truth, they say it's post-truth, and it's kind of trivializes truth at all. But that's conflicting. That's problematic. Yeah.
Thank you, Indrani. That's precisely our point also, and that's why we have a session this evening on translating concepts, where these myths of science being objective and things, getting translated without any sort of cultural baggage
So
will
I
be
can
discussed.
see.
So the next
Yeah.
question
So
is,
I can see the question. Can
what
I
is your
choose the
take on
question?
considering
Can I choose
translation
the
as
question?
profession?
Mangalam, can I choose the questions that I want to answer? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can I choose the questions? Sorry.
The question is, what is your take on considering translation as a profession?
Okay. Actually, I don't know. I wouldn't really be qualified to answer that. I think in foreign languages, there's a lot of money. I know that. Many of my colleagues, they have been doing translation, both technical as well as literary. I don't know about the other way around. And actually, I have done all my translations I have done is only into Spanish. So, but not much. I really have been more involved in theorizing translation rather than in actually doing and selling translations. Wherever I've done translations, they have been on somebody else's shoulders. So I have not tried to market myself as a translator. So I'm really not able to. Yeah, take it. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is you talked about Atul Kumar is asking this question, Indrani. What you talked about your understanding translation based on post-human platform, but is there a methodology to theorize this understanding?
Sorry, what is the question? I mean, who is this? What is this question? Can you say? Because I'm seeing different questions from what you're asking. I'm not able to hear your questions very clearly, but if you allow me to just look at my questions, look at the questions that have come on my chat, I can answer them. Is that okay? Okay. So, I can't hear you.
I'll help you with the questions.
No. I don't hear you, Mangalam.
So Dr. Mangala Kumari is asking, can you please throw a light on the role of mother tongue in the translation process?
The role of mother tongue. Okay. Yeah, so the mother tongue. So, I mean, I don't understand this question. I mean, mother tongue, role of mother tongue in what? I mean, I'm not talking about, um, I really don't know. Mother tongue, you're translating into mother tongue. I mean, mother tongue is one of the many things, many languages. So, mother tongue is one language. There can be other languages, and in the sense that we look at it as nomads or as the post-human. I think all languages are at the same. They are in the same status. But for example, I don't have any privilege in my mother tongue. You know, I have been learning so many languages at the same time, and I don't know whether I'm the least equipped in my mother tongue. But if you are the kind of person who is in just know your mother tongue and you are very good in your mother tongue, so that can be a great advantage. But you know, like Deleuze and Guattari, they say that even as people, he gave the Deleuze and Guattari gives the example of Kafka, who was writing his whatever literatures we all know. Now he is actually a Czech, and he's writing in German, and he chose to write in the German of Prague, which is an inferior version of German than the German of Vienna or the German of Germany. And Deleuze and Guattari, they argue that that is the not being familiar with the perfect German perhaps served him certain advantage in being able to look at things, in looking at things. Sorry, I'm sorry about that. They kind of said that because they were not there. I mean, what I'm saying is that because they were talking from, because Kafka was writing from outside of any privilege of any mother tongue, perhaps he got the insight to look at certain things in certain ways, which made his writing unique. So if your mother tongue is, I mean, I'm only speaking as a person who's practicing, you know, because translation every day, because and every day we are aware of the fact that we don't know our mother tongue, so it has nothing to do with what our professional lives are. So, of course, knowing your mother tongue is a great advantage because it gives you a firm ground. But we are, as foreign language teachers, we don't have any firm ground. So, I think that is what I would like to have to say.
Yeah. Thank you, Indra. Is from a very eminent colleague at Central University of Karnataka, Professor Donmoor, and he asked you this question. True, unheard melodies and unsung songs are heard in translations. Marginal voices are heard. But due to politics of translations, such voices do not cross borders and get confined to a certain place. What should we do to make such voices heard across the globe?
Yes, I think that is the point, you know, that obviously I think I think the example that I gave of the Santhali people who do not want translation, they do not want to share. And they said, if you want to read our literature, you learn our language. So I really cannot tell what can be an ideal situation. But one of the things which, for example, I do very consciously is to try and translate our Indian literature into Spanish. I mean, that's what I have done. I have done all my translations, and most of my translations are, I can say, into Spanish, and I have published them from Spain or elsewhere. So I think that is what I think you should translate into the foreign languages, into the foreign language, or into. I think any translation is possible. I mean, you can even do from Kannada to Bangla. I mean, for example, as most Bengalis might not be aware of what is happening in Kannada literature, you know, or the other way around. But most of us, we access, for example, what we call as regional, you know, that is somewhat of a status symbol. You know, when you say regional, it's not very good, you know. So I think if there is inter translation, I mean, if you're not accessing, of course, Kannada or Tamil or any other literature, or even for me Hindi, I don't read Hindi very well. through English, it's very comfortable actually, and it makes us lazy. And I think we have to get over that laziness, and we have to do more of interlingual translations, and not just for seminars, and see how they can be published and marketed. I mean, I think people who are in marketing will be better equipped to answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Indrani. The next question is from Mr. Atul Kumar. He is putting this question. You talked about during your keynote speech that translation helps us to understand translation based on post-human platform. But is there a methodology to theorize this understanding?
I don't know what is this methodology that you're talking about. The post-human is only a philosophy, which is, I think, very much sprung from Deleuze and Guattari's writings. And after that, many people have spoken about it, and in Europe, as now also in third world countries, like you have Hamid Dabashi, is very post-human. There is no methodology that I can think of. Each one has different one. Mignolo's vincularidad, or Edward Glissant's, relationality. I mean, so there are different ways, and that's precisely the point. It's not about how do you do translation. It is what do you do with your translation, and how do you do in the sense of it doesn't recommend, or it doesn't suggest that we have a perfect translation. There is nothing like a perfect translation, and it is perfectly. I think my understanding is like it is all right to do wrong translations, and hope that somebody will do something better, and you just attempt and try and talk about it as much as you can. So I really don't know. That precisely is what post-humanism contests of any perfect translation that might be possible. And because any perfect, I mean, post-humanism does away with hierarchy, with verticalities, with normativity, with fixities, with rootedness as verticalities. So I think the question of the matter of, I mean, it's like any literature or any theory or any painting. For example, we have done, for example, if you look at Jesus and Mary, there are so many people who have done Jesus and Mary's paintings, Now, the thing is today when we look at all of them, I mean, for example, for me, the painting done by Velázquez, of Jesus and Mary, I think it's, or even of Michelangelo, I think it's beautiful. I mean, so you put them all together and see them and don't judge which is better or which is worse. I mean, take each one of them as it is, with its shortcomings and with its positivities. I think it is approach towards nomad territory, where you are not looking at any institutional approval or any colonizing gaze or any kind of authorization or legitimacy. It's precisely a contestation, a countering of all of these issues of legitimacy and hierarchy and fixities and being associated with institutions. I think that's my answer. Yeah.
Thank you, Indrani. The next question is from Ms. Tanusri. She is asking, could you please tell what should we keep in mind while translating so as to keep the originality intact as much as possible?
No, I don't agree. We should not keep the originality at all, because the translator is also a transcreator. Please don't translate to keep the originality. Please don't translate to keep the originality. Translate to keep the difference. Let your identity, let your thinking, let your intervention show through the translation. And I think this is very important. I mean, the translator can completely I mean, even people, I mean, we know of people, of writers who have done translations of their own works, and they have actually said that this is not my Spanish version, this is a different work, but it is something like a translation. So I think that is very important, and I think you should just have the confidence, not be bothered about whether your translation is perfect or true to the original or not. It should not be true to the original, to the best of my knowledge. Yeah. It need not be. It need not be true to the original.
Okay, thank you. Basically, probably this question hinted at the literary aspect of translation. I mean, literary translation, while you come across with this dilemma of how to keep that emotions which you feel while reading the original. I mean, as a literary translation translator myself, I can relate to this question. And perhaps my take would be to uh, take the essence of the text. Gregory Rabassa is one of the most outstanding translators of Latin American literature. It's thanks to his English translation that we have come to read works of Marquez and other such great writers. So he also says this. And in fact, his translation, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, in fact, noted that I would like to prefer the English translation rather than reading my own Spanish version. So this is the possibility which we translators have. So yeah, the next question is from Dr. Java Oza. She's a colleague who teaches at Doon University. And her question is, she's asking, you mentioned translation as an act of colonization. Can it also be a route to healing in terms of Mignolo's healing aesthetics? Could you speak a bit about what a healing aesthetics of translations might constitute?
Yeah, that's a tough one, Java. Yeah. What is the healing that I have, I think, briefly mentioned in my paper? If you look at, for example, the Chicana literature, so for example, you have myths of, for example, La Malinche, where she is made to look like a prostitute, a traitor, um, you know, um, a public woman, and so on and so forth. But if you look at Chicana literature, it completely turns the whole discourse upside down, and the same Malinche becomes, I mean, if we consider Malinche as this in between space, but it allows for healing, because Malinche eventually becomes also the space where the Chicanas, find salvation, find peace, and find strength, to contest. They are being stereotyped into either as bad mothers or bad women, or as whatever, So they say, "ठीक है, हम लोग," or even, for example, the poetry of Nicolas Killian, in his black poetry. So he flaunts blackness as a condition of privilege. So he says, okay, so I cannot say 1, 2, 3. So the Cuban accent may, he says that I say one, do, tres, but ask them to ask those Yankees to pronounce Aconcagua, and they won't be able to pronounce. So that is, I think, it's healing. So it is, so translation can also be healing. I think can also be a space, and I think the Chicana example is the best. I just added the case of the black poetry also. Yeah.
Thanks for the answer. The next question is by Dr. Suraj Kumar, another very eminent colleague at our university. He teaches Hindi here. And the question is, what contrast you can see if you compare colonial and post-colonial translations in Latin America in indigenous languages to Spanish and vice versa?
Okay. Now, when we are studying Latin America, many people, I mean, many of those whom I have cited, like Mignolo, and even feminists, Latin American feminists, they have denounced post-coloniality, post-colonial, because they talk about post-coloniality, because they say the post-colonial, that colonial condition has not changed. Only the designs have, I mean, the designs are the same. Only the people have changed, So earlier you had the whiplashers, and now you might call them as whatever, I don't know, the executives, the corporators. So I think the whole understanding of post-colonial from Indian perspective is problematic, because when we look at post-colonial, and when we look at Latin Indian colonization, we are looking at it through enlightenment, which comes some centuries later. Whereas in Latin America, it comes with Renaissance, which happens in the 15th century. So I think there is a lot of difference in post-colonial of India and post-coloniality. That is my first point. The point of the post-colonial, if you like, in the Latin America. The second point is that translations are not always in writing. As I've told in my paper, and what translations are happening in indigenous language, I'm not qualified to speak because I don't read indigenous languages. Definitely, there have been translations happening into Spanish. Now, right from colonial times, in colonial times, for example, Popol Vuh, which was the sacred text of the Mayan people, actually was only there in oral versions, but then there was this, the Dominican priest who translated it into Spanish, in clandestinely, without anybody knowing. And that is how the Popol Vuh has been preserved in its writing. What the translations have been going on, and I think Latin American literature, especially from the time of the boom, a lot of translation has been going on. What's happening earlier, I really don't know, but definitely a lot of 19th century writers and thinkers were reading a lot of literatures of Romanticism and like Victor Hugo, Rousseau, and all such people. They were reading a lot of romantic literature, also from Spain, and I think so through translations, of course. They were not reading in French or in anything else. They were reading in Spanish. So it was happening, but I'm really not aware of anything happening into indigenous language. I don't think any translations happened in the indigenous language until recently. I think because as I told you, that indigenous languages were not even decipherable. They were not written in alphabet. They were written either in hieroglyphics or in other forms, like quipus. So most of their writings happened after colonization, because they felt, some of them felt the need to write down their histories. So I don't know. I don't think there was any translation into indigenous languages until very recently. Yeah.
Thank you. Now the next question is by Smriti Latsaria, colleague and researcher at JNU, and she's asking: is translation also an extension of learning culture, especially in context of Latin languages or Latin American languages? Probably she wants to.
Yeah, because language is cultural. There is no. I don't know whether language is cultural or culture is linguistic. I mean, they are both. Yeah, I think both at the same level. I mean, language and culture are intertwined, are an assemblage, are and I do not, since I am into the realm of the post-human, so I do not privilege either. Yeah.
Is probably going to be intriguing to you. Syed Muin is asking, Madam, can you explain religious text translation methods and what is the qualification of translator? Do you have any take on this religious text translation?
Yeah, about religious text, that's a very interesting question. Actually, I have a paper published, but I cannot share it now. But in Spain, it happened. There were 700 years when the Moorish dominance was there. There were Muslim rulers in Spain, and lots of translations happened. And especially in the translations were happening when they were at the fag end of their rule in Spain. When the Christian Spain was gradually taking over the non-Christian Spain, then they encouraged translation, and translation of the Quran happened, or translation of the Bible also happened. Yeah, and it either into Hebrew or into Spanish or into Arabic. Now, this kind of affair, where conversations between between Muhammad and Jesus Christ, was enabled, but this period, of course, it didn't last very long, because when Christian rulers came, then of course they got scared about subversion, so they stopped translation. They did not allow. I mean, there are translations available of the Bible into Arabic and Hebrew, but they were not circulated, and they were not printed. So there are only some old manuscripts available in museums. So religious texts are so this history has been in Spain, because from about the 13th century onwards, these translations, actually from 10th century, translations in Spain began. But I think religious texts, they started around 13th century, when the Spaniards were much more keen on that all those who are newly converted from Islam to Christians, they should learn the Bible. And so they encourage translation into Arabic and Hebrew, but I think not for very long. So religious translation in today's context, I think it is. I don't know, because I know that all of. I mean, I don't read religious texts. I haven't read, but I know that, for example, my grandfather used to read the Quran in translation, of course, in English, and he used to read the Bible, and he used to read our own scriptures also. So I think, so I don't know who are those translators, what are they doing. I don't know whether they were reading it only to read and practice, this whatever secularism, because they were also freedom fighters, or whether they were in conversations with translations. I don't know, because very often when you read a religious text, you don't understand. Then who interprets for you? So I have found it very difficult, because I'm into Hispanic studies, and often I've had to try to understand certain concepts of Christianity. I've had to try to read the Bible, but I found it very tough, because I don't know. Their religion. So it is very difficult, because that's why I said this whole notion of how do you do an exact translation? Do we have to do an exact translation? And my answer is always no. I think that's very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Now the next question is by Nupur, another researcher and colleague at JNU. So she's asking, you talked about translation through bodies engaged in the process of coding and decoding meanings. How do we translate such language of the bodies in terms of masculinity, oblique femininity in culturally different cultural locations, probably cultural different geolocations?
Yeah. Nupur, thank you. I know that I have this publication, where I've done a comparison of Kalari Payattu and the Capoeira, and I have talked there about how masculine bodies perform resistance, decoloniality, and I think so. For this audience, I think bodies can perform. I think I just try to give the example of the black body. The slaves who were brought. Now, when they were brought, their hands and legs were often tied, and even when they landed up, they were tied, and they couldn't move their bodies very much. So if you look at the dancers like salsa, you find that in the Latino dancers, that their body moves are very limited. They do not stretch their legs. Their legs are very minimally moved. I mean, there is movement, but it doesn't separate very widely. So it's, I think, reflection and reminiscence of the fact that they used to be tied. And I think that they only move their caderas, or their hips. They don't move. They are not able to move, for example, in the way that, for example, Indians can. So their hips. So it's only their hips which move, and that's because the rest of their bodies could not move. Their hands were tied. Their legs were tied. So I think this is what I have to say. So how they translate it is that the body pain has translated into the capoeira or into different forms of dances, because that was the only way by which they could do resistance and they could take out their frustration, because they remembered their African beats, they remembered the beats, they forgot their language, they remembered the beats of the drums, so the same beats. Like today, to look at African music, it's very similar, So they recreated those beats and they tried to recreate the moves of their bodies, but they could not recreate in the same way because their hands and legs were tied. So that is a kind of a translating with their body, you can say. Then, of course, Valenzuela has taken about writing with the body, and which is also about, for example, she talks about how in under Pinochet, when she's walking through the streets of Argentina, she continuously feels threatened. Anytime she can be taken, whisked away, disappeared, killed, and yet because she says that the body is not the body has pores, and everything goes in and everything goes out. So the body also becomes a medium, because it is not just the body, it's not just an object. It is also it has agency because it is also breathing. Apart from the fact that you are breathing as a subject, your body also breathes because it has pores. And it is through this pores that the fear enters your body, and then how you process that and how you deliver on that. She says that she keeps walking through the roads. So I think Mangalam's the CFP that your team sent me was talking about thinking. Translation and thinking are similar. So I think even writing I will include, because in Latin America there is no thinking without writing, and there is no writing without thinking. So I think you can use also Valenzuela's understanding of writing with the body, and of course, I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, thanks, Indrani. Now the next question is by a colleague here at Central University of Karnataka, Dr. Kiran, who teaches political science and is very, very heavily interested and invested in debates and social sciences. His question is, we are using uh, majority of concepts in social sciences we are using, and these concepts have been basically they have their origin, or they have come from, or they have biblical references. So how do you see this dichotomy? While we talk about liberating concepts in social sciences, we're still bound with, or we are still using those biblical references. Like he is sharing one example, like the term justice. So this dichotomy of translation in social sciences, do you have any take on this, Indrani?
I think when you're talking about social sciences, again, I'm not a disciplinarian. Even as I say social sciences, I'm including general science and humanities and arts. But okay, so social sciences, any concept. I think today, if you talk about trying to liberate concepts from their original biblical meanings, I think is not very. I don't see the point, because the whole agenda of social science today have gone global, and if you want to kind of decolonize concepts as you are proposing, I think you're only going to increase the gaps further between north and south, or even between south and south. I think it's very important to take these concepts, and maybe you can decolonize them, especially. But then there are also concepts which have come from non-Western world, non-Christian world. For example, all the mathematical concepts of algebra and the whole discipline of algebra. So there is no ending to that. You're just getting back into regionalism. I think it's going to be very claustrophobic. But I think the next speaker of this panel, I think he's going to take that, and I hope you get your answer satisfactorily there.
And the last question of this session is by Aroma. What role does the famous binary power public knowledge play in the nowadays Indian context when it comes to the translation scene? Do you think translation has been uh, the weapon for marginalized versus powerful?
Yeah, I mean that is very